if everyone is ready, and that gives me the chance to welcome you all in this virtual lecture hall to the award of the Walter Markov Prize 2023 to Kim, Sebastian Todzi, and my special thanks goes of course to Tim, but also to Cassandra Mark-Thiesen and Marc Buggeln, who have taken the seats on our virtual podium. My name is Katja Kastrik. I represent the European Network in Universal and Global History, which is the institution that awards the prize, and I will chair during the coming hour. The prize ceremony usually takes place at an annual Congress, but unfortunately Kim could not attend the Congress in The Hague last year, and so we thought we honor his excellent book in a special event, and we thought we use the special surrounding of today for presenting Kim's work in a form of a roundtable discussion. We're very, very glad that Cassandra and Marc accepted our invitation to share their reading of the book and for opening a joint discussion on future areas of investigation that Kim has opened up with his study. We also agreed that I take a brief moment to introduce the prize and the reasons of the selecting committee to award it to Kim, and for briefly introducing the speakers. Afterwards, I will first hand the word to Kim, who will tell us why he actually wrote that book and what's in it. And then Cassandra and Marc open our conversation with their comments, and from there we just see where our questions take us. ENIOC actually initiated the Walter Markov Prize already in the mid-1990s, and since then we annually calls for applications. The prize honors an outstanding master or PhD thesis that makes a seminal contribution to the research in the field of global history. Topically, this can include studies which contribute in innovative and timely ways to the fields Walter Markov himself was engaged with, in particular the comparative study of revolutions, the historical analysis of social movements and decolonization processes in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and also histories from below. But we have always remained flexible in terms of the spectrum of possible topics to stay attuned to the changing field, changing shape of our field. After all, with the prize, ENIOC seeks to encourage younger scholars to continue their decidedly global historical interest in their future academic careers, which is all but easy, given the institutional structure of history as a profession and the institutions of academia. On the last call in 2022, we received more than 30 excellent works that were submitted, and the selection committee indeed then found more than one worthy the prize. Thus, we decided to split the prize and also to honor 3 more works with an honorable distinction. For the works that received this distinction, please visit our website for the names of the authors and their topics. Because I don't want to present them today in extension, but I want to mention that the second work that received the prize was actually the work written by Emanuel Harisch from the University of Vienna. In his PhD, he has dealt with the African trade unions in the world of organized labor. We presented this work in The Hague in summer, and today it is actually Kim and his work that is in the center of attention. His study was published last year, as some of you may know, under the German title Unternehmen Weltaneignung, der Woermann-Konzern und der deutsche Kolonialismus 1837 bis 1916. The selection committee, of which I was part of, and those I can report from direct contact, was impressed by Kim's compelling study of the entanglements between colonial rule, global economy, and entrepreneurship in the German Colonial Empire, which Kim Todzi defended at the University of Hamburg, if I'm correct, in 2022. At least you submitted in 2021. And the center of the work is the history of the Hamburg-based Woermann Group, whose rise and fall is traced in view of its close relations with German colonialism. And Kim describes this relation with an empirical density and an analytical strength that is indeed outstanding. With every page we turn, we see a symbiotic relationship, that's his own words, developing that shows the mutual reinforcing economic and political interests, penetration, exploitation, and dominance that even includes the involvement with the Herero and Nama genocide in German Southwest Africa, to mention just one of the highly instructive aspects that the book opens up for us. And Kim was very well prepared to write this book, because actually already during his study, which were devoted to history, literature, and education, he developed an interest in German imperialism and global perspectives. That made him write an MA thesis on, interestingly, female imperialism, where he compared concepts of identity and colonial rule in publications of the British Women Emigration Association and the Frauenbund der deutschen Kolonialgeschichte. Right afterwards, at least this is what I take from his CV, he began to work in the research center in Hamburg that is called Hamburg's Post-Colonial Heritage, Hamburg and the Early Globalization, which was probably the best place, the best surrounding for writing this PhD. And Kim finished his comprehensive archival work and the writing while actually already coordinating the research center. And he is one of the rare and favorable exceptions to the rule, in the sense that he continued his work after the PhD in this academic surrounding. He stays there in Hamburg at the center for the research, and I guess that is now for the second book, in which he stays committed to the field of colonial economic history, but now focusing on the global entanglements of the pharmaceutical company Boehringer Mannheim, now from the colonial past to the post-colonial period. And here too, I guess, he connects actors, institutions, politics, and resources. But before you get interested in his second book, we would like you to make, first of all, curious to read his first book. And we do think we could not find better colleagues reading the book already for us than Cassandra, who is currently Junior Research Group Leader in the DFG Excellence Cluster, Africa Multiple, Reconfiguring African Studies at the University of Bayreuth, and Marc, Professor of History and Director of the Institute of Contemporary Regional and Public History at the European University in Flensburg. There's much to say about their expertise, but I don't want to pick and choose now from their long and thrilling publication and research records. Please take a look at it yourself and discover it. And when you do so, in case you have not done so, then you will see and guess, as I do, that they will have read the book with quite different questions and interests in mind. And that makes us, I think, even more curious to hear what they will share with us after the reading. With this, I would like to end, not without saying that it is really with great pleasure that we award this prize to you, Kim, and I do so in the name of the Selection and Steering Committee of ENUC. And I can say that if you could have come to The Hague, to the Congress, we could have handed you in person the certificate and you would have gotten it with flowers. Now the certificate will reach you by mail, but it is prepared and will be sent to you soon. And then as an alternative to the flowers, we think we set up this joint discussion with Alexandra and Marc. And with this, I stop and give the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katja. And I think it is worth more than 1,000 flowers to have my esteemed colleagues, Cassandra and Marc Buggeln, here in this endeavor. And I think it's a perfect occasion, and I could not imagine a better award ceremony than to discuss with these two colleagues my book. I must say, I'm really excited, and I'm deeply honored to be the recipient of the Walter Markov Prize, and I'm really thankful to the European Network and Universal and Global History. And I would really like to thank the prize committee for choosing my work alongside another for the Walter Markov Prize. And I'm really thankful for the opportunity to share bits and pieces of my work and to discuss it today here. So I really look forward to the discussion in the next hour or so. Before we get into the discussion, I think in the next few minutes, I will try to delve into the details of my research as fast as I can. And I think it's important to highlight that this endeavor has been fueled by the quest for understanding German colonialism and global capitalism and their entanglements better, and to try to get a better understanding of the social fabric of colonialism on the ground. But before I delve into the details of the book, I would like to express my gratitude to the friends and colleagues at the Research Center of Hamburg's Post-Colonial Legacy, of which I'm still a part of. Unfortunately, only until October this year, then the financing of the city runs up. But it has been a great pleasure to work there, and I think it was invaluable with the guidance and support I had there, and they had been informing my journey for a long time now. But I would also, and especially, like to extend my gratitude to Marc Buggeln and Cassandra Mark-Thiesen, who have graciously agreed to provide comments on this book. And I think their own scholarly contributions not only informed, but also inspired my research journey. So I think the wealth of expertise that is present here today adds tremendous value to the discussion on the book, and I really look forward. I think I will embark now to go to give you a broad overview of what I try to do, or what I think are the main points of my research and what I try to accomplish with it. The main thesis or the main argument of Unternehmen Weltaneignung is that the company Woermann developed in a kind of symbiotic relationship with German colonialism. And that is no other economic enterprise whatsoever has been so closely associated with formal German colonial rule in West and Southwest Africa over such a long period of time than the Woermann Group, the Woermann-Konzern, as I termed it, which emerged from the trading house C. Woermann in the 1880s. Since 1880, Adolf Woermann headed the company and its group and became the defining figure and a very important political merchant. Yet despite the prominence of this company and its leader, many aspects of the Woermann Group have remained unexplored in research. For an overall account of the company's history, one had to rely on the company's own publications, which is quite critical, and or on two rather journalistic publications which bear their own flaws, as journalistic publications sometimes do. The historian, the late Karin Hausen, spoke in this context of the Woermann complex, as she termed it, having to remain impossible to get through. And I think I tasked myself to prove Karin Hausen wrong in a way. I have a huge respect for her, and she informed and inspired my research as well. But I thought there should be a way to get through the complex analytically. And the focus on such a business as the Woermann Group serves as a very important analytical focus for the whole book. I think I deliberately chose an actor-centered approach to make sense of colonial globalization as a form of global microhistory. I think this approach illuminates the ways in which individuals and social groups as historical actors negotiated, resisted, or embraced the economic realities shaped by colonialism within a broader framework of global capitalism. And this perspective enriches our understanding of both the historical development of capitalism and the varied experiences of individuals impacted by colonial histories. So the history of the Woermann Group highlights the intricate, close, and yet not entirely consistent nexus between the private business interests of individuals and formal colonial rule. C. Woermann, founded by Karl Woermann in 1837, was one of the most important German companies in Africa before the colonial annexations in 1884 and onwards. Following the death of the company's founder Karl Woermann, his son Adolf Woermann headed the company between 1880 and 1909 and became one of the best known and most influential political merchants of his time. Without Adolf Woermann, there would have been no colony, German colony of Cameroon. Adolf Woermann not only agitated for the colonial expansion of the German Empire, he also prepared it in practice. Following his instructions, representatives of C. Woermann negotiated and signed protection treaties with the local authorities on the Cameroon coast, which became the basis for the colonial annexation of Cameroon. This was the beginning of the symbiotic relationship between the company and Germany's former colonial rule. It was, as I termed it, a remarkable public-private partnership. After the foundation of Germany's colonial empire, Adolf Woermann strategically expanded his business network. In addition to the parent company C. Woermann, the Woermann Group comprised, among others, shipping lines like the Woermann-Linie, plantation companies, and concessionary companies. At the heart of the group was the Woermann family, whose relationships, intergenerational and transregional networks, personal commitments, capital ownership, and management united the otherwise legally independent companies under a single roof. And that's why I came to term it a concern, because in German economic literature, this is what is defined as a concern. The Woermann Group's almost symbiotic relationship with German colonial rule continued for several decades. A key factor in this was the founding of the shipping line Woermann-Linie in 1885, which over time came to play a very prominent role in the family group. The Woermann-Linie rose to become the largest shipping company in West Africa and an important cornerstone of the German colonial economy. Its significance as a central transoceanic link between the German Empire and its colonies in West Africa was magnified by the fact that it remained the only German shipping company to offer permanent liner services in the region until 1906. Woermann became synonymous with the colonial maritime logistics of the German Empire. For the company, this holds significance as it profited from the increasing trade volume with Africa, irrespective of the success of entities or companies like the trading house C. Woermann or its plantation companies. The company network thrived, whether the economic upswing impacted German, British, French, or Belgian colonies, or if rival firms expanded their share of the overall revenue. Ultimately, goods were transported on vessels operated by either the Woermann-Linie or the Liverpool-based Elder Dempster Line, which together formed a cartel in 1895. Woermann's importance was further increased when German colonial rule encountered massive resistance and sought to crush it brutally. During the war against the Herero and Nama, Woermann organized almost the entire supply of troops, materials, and provisions from Germany to Southwest Africa. The Woermann-Linie devoted a large part of its energy to the war logistics and was committed to the smooth running of the transports beyond what was contractually agreed. And that's why I came to term them enablers of the genocide. As part of the Arbeitergestellung, a forced labor deployment system, the Woermann-Linie forcibly employed Herero and Nama war prisoners in the ports of Swakopmund and Lüderitzbucht. Almost 1 in 10 of the 1,200 Woermann workers employed in Swakopmund were prisoners of war. The extent of Woermann's wartime profits remained uncertain, with only vague speculations circulating. Through my calculations, it has become evident that the company's engagement was exceptionally lucrative. The Woermann-Linie documented war-related earnings amounting to approximately 26.5 million marks, which roughly corresponds to nowadays 185.5 million euro. It is an important aspect besides of these to look beyond the bird's eye view of the management, the data and important figures like Adolf Woermann, for example. I think in order to understand what I said in the introduction, to understand the social fabric of colonialism, I analyzed the networks within which the Woermann Group, its employees and managers operated. Economic actions are always embedded in cultural, political, and social practices and structures. The example of Woermann provides insights into the social dimension and cultural mediation of economic activities in a colonial context. The emergence of a colonial contact zone created a social space characterized by the simultaneous dynamics of connection and separation, the ambiguity of social relationships, and the simplification of racial distinctions. These aspects heavily influence the social context of business transactions. While Europeans in the colonies inhabited a Parallelgesellschaft, a parallel society that translated white supremacist fantasies into social norms and habitual practices, African business partners faced colonial rule as a fundamental crisis. However, this crisis did not lead to the complete displacement of African entrepreneurs. African traders, for example, sought means and ways to confront the challenges of colonial capitalism, and including exploring new businesses. A significant finding is on top of that despite political upheavals, business relationships with African partners persisted across generations. Another essential outcome of the research is the recognition that despite the biases in the sources, the resilience, resistance, and agency of Africans are evident. To summarize, my research emphasizes or tries to emphasize the innovative potential arising from the intersection of colonial history and business history. It enables the empirical examination of the complex entanglements of material and discursive processes in the history of colonial capitalism. This approach transcends the boundaries of cultural, economic, and social history of colonialism, amalgamating diverse theoretical and methodological approaches into what I call a post-colonial expanded business history. Post-colonial business history thus suggests that the current capitalist world order has an imperial prehistory. In employing an actor-centered approach, shows and allows the exploration of how the actions of collective and individual actors shape the structures of imperialism and global capitalism. And I think this approach emphasizes that focusing on a transnationally operating company allows for a relational examination of remote regions within the same analytical framework. It reveals the ruptures and continuities, complexities and contradictions of colonization. As much as the history of colonialism was a system of racial injustice, globalized violence and exploitation, it also demonstrates how colonized individuals and collectives, both on a small and large scale, repeatedly resisted the impositions of colonialism, faced its challenges, and developed agency. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There is applause in form of signs. Thanks a lot for this brief but clear, informative introduction into the book. I think we can immediately give the word to our two guest commentators. I don't know whether you have beforehand agreed who would speak first. Not? Any preferences from your side?
I'm happy to start, I think. That's okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be part of the ceremony. It's quite an honor. I think it presents a really fitting start also to 2024, a year already defined by continued global insecurity, strife, and discord, to be part of this Walter Markov Prize award ceremony. I understand that taking inspiration from the man himself, the Walter Markov Prize is meant to honor an outstanding doctoral thesis in the field of global history that, among other things, contributes to research fields such as history from below. A thesis that also reflects the practices of border-crossing dialogue and mutual learning as guiding lights to transformative instead of just symbolic academic internationalization. This, of course, I think, being especially important for the discipline of history. I think it's also relevant to highlight Markov's own interest in and personal suffering as a result of Germany's difficult past or present, depending on how you want to see it. I'm especially glad to be part of the celebration because I see Kim Todzi's thesis, which translates to the Woermann Group and German Colonialism, 1837 to 1916, to have taken up all of these points and much more, as it links micro and macro level social and economic histories of the Woermann Company, as well as of German colonialism. As it opens up shared history between Germany and Africa, histories that I think will certainly stimulate a lot of discussion in several parts of the world. And finally, as it does not conveniently discount the histories of individual African men, women, or groups, because the source base is not complete enough, as we often hear. Rather, this study really gives importance to piecing together fragments of the past for the sake of writing a more holistic, a better global history, in fact. This has already been mentioned, but I'll repeat it anyway. At the center of Todzi's study, which crisscrosses South America, Southeast Asia, West and Southern Africa, lies the history of the Woermann Company as trading company, as shipping line, as owner of plantations and masses of land in the colonies, which Todzi describes again as over time developing an almost symbiotic relationship with German colonialism. But amidst this, what may sound like a very kind of intellectual engagement with these interrelations between globalization or global capitalism and imperial expansion, Todzi is able to really do an excellent job at unraveling complex and rich histories of economic, social, political, cultural relations in and between Germany and Africa, including in a multi-directional manner. And as a result, this study of the Woermann Company is far removed from the kind of insular business histories that we've become used to reading. It is dynamic, it's cross-cutting, as was already mentioned, really highlighting diverse aspects of this past in the best of ways. To return to the theme of difficult past, I don't think it's lost on anyone in this room that in recent years, a lot of energy has been spent on grappling with Germany's colonial past in the university, in the museum, in government offices, and in broader society as well. Whereas many people have enjoyed the comfort of reiterating that the past is in the past, as Aleida Aßmann wrote in 2008, today, the past appears to be no longer written in granite, but rather in water. New constructions of it are periodically arising and changing the course of politics and history. The role played by the past in future making is what makes studies like Todzi so important. Studies that are able to juggle or at least leave room for all of the ambivalences of colonial rule, as opposed to simply looking for a kind of balance sheet approach or the statistics, approaches far removed from human experience, approaches that are not able to see beyond Black and white. To quickly move on to the point of shared history as a non-Eurocentric approach to writing global history and to formulating historical discourses across borders, Todzi in his work presents as a complex of shared histories between Europe and several other parts of the world. Though I was particularly drawn to the descriptions of interrelations between Germany and Africa, given my own background, parts of Africa which were formally annexed, others which, such as Cameroon, others which were not formally annexed, but kind of dominated through private capital. So different titles, but very similar practices, in fact. The second case of parts of Africa which were dominated through private capital is, of course, I would say Liberia in this particular study. And when I said that I was particularly drawn to that subject, I'm also drawn to it because Liberia is where I was born and where I spent the first part of my childhood. But also as a historian of Liberia now, I've really been waiting for this book because I've been hearing about this study for years and years. And so it was really exciting to finally be able to read this exciting work and to learn about the relations between Germany and this part of West Africa in a very detailed manner. I certainly wasn't disappointed to read about the crew laborers working on the Woermann ships, about the complex relationships between the Liberian government and how important their adherence to Western property laws were for kind of marking them or attracting this kind of dominance, right, via private capital. And of course, I was interested in how Woermann was wanting to formally annex Liberia in 1915, kind of projecting how the company may move together with the German government moving forward. In addition, in his reconstructions of these unequal engagements between Germany and parts of Africa, so let's say Cameroon in this case, we come to clearly see this intermingling between business and political endeavors. We also discover the extent to which aspects like racial division, racial subjugation became a matter of good management. And yet the study, as was already said, affords agency to different individuals, African local individuals, different groups within the societies in terms of their engagement with the Germans, collaboration, resistance, something in between. And that was interesting to read as well. And I think these kinds of discussions will stimulate other new questions about sovereignty, what it means to be a sovereign nation, about global interdependence, and about more cultural things like cosmopolitanism, so how people are moving in the world during that period. As a labor historian at heart, I of course need to end on the subject of histories from below. I really enjoyed the careful treatment of labor relations in the study, from what we learn about the connection between forced labor and the spread of global capitalism, to learning about, again, the artificial barriers put into place in the workforce and the implications of that in the long term. Also the continuation of older mechanisms for mobilizing labor in the 19th and 20th centuries, a subject very close to my own interest. And what we learned about the formidable mobility of not just European, but also African workers during this period. So the different locations that they ended up in because of being part of this network. Also as a Black woman, historian of Africa, historian of the globe, I do spend a lot of my time thinking about what men in the past thought and did. And so it was really impactful to read Kim Todzi's his analysis of the role of African women in connection with the Woermann Company and their staff in Africa. On the one hand, in a very matter-of-fact way, but then also in a very detailed manner as well. So it wasn't just kind of brushed over because it was an uncomfortable subject to talk about. I think rather following in the footsteps of Karina Ray and Jeremy Rich, we get this very detailed analysis of relationships, sexual relationships, formal relationships, the lives of the offsprings, things like that, which was exciting to read about. Maybe to end, Kim Todzi's study really puts on display the benefits of merging these diverse subdisciplines of the field of history, whether social history, cultural history, economic history, gender history, and business history. As I said, it also leaves a lot of threads for future researchers to pick up, but not just German researchers in Liberia and Cameroon, so in lots of different parts of the world. And it'll be interesting to see kind of what comes of this initial work in the long term. The book is proof that the fruits of really tedious archival work followed by careful empirical analysis can indeed be sweet. I'm really glad that I got to read this. I'm already sharing it with others, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring comment, picking up on things that have been said, but adding a lot more on it. Marc, would you like immediately to
Yes.
Thanks.
So, yes, thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad that I had the opportunity to read Kim's book and to contribute here. The idea that I got is that I will not only give a laudatory speech, but also raise questions for the discussions and some critical remarks, which I will do in the second part. So I will start with a praise and then some critique and questions. In my eyes, Kim's book offers a very successful combination of political, cultural, and corporate history, particularly with regard to German colonialism, using the Hamburg-based Woermann Group as an example, but also repeatedly weaving in comparative and global historical perspectives. And so it's quite right that he get the prize here in the global history competition. In the 1970s and 1980s, research into German colonialism, we heard about Karin Hausen, was strongly characterized by social and economic history. Questions about the economics of colonialism and profitability played an important role in these early research. But since the 1990s, at the latest, however, cultural, historical, and increasingly post-colonial perspective on the history of colonialism gained in importance. Questions about the racist and gendered order of colonialism and the relations of violence took center stage. Questions of economics have sometimes been too far out of focus. Kim's study now presents a work that combines the two approaches in an almost ideal-typical way, I would say. In the following, I would like to emphasize a few particular productive results of the work. Kim Todzi shows, for example, that the establishment of the German colony in Cameroon made it almost impossible to abolish the previous trade credit system, and that the importance of the system was often misjudged by the Europeans. European trading companies did not appreciate the system because they had to grant African middlemen large loans so that they could buy goods from them in inner Cameroon. The traders often did not pay back the full amount of the credit, so that over time large outstanding debts arose which the German companies could hardly collect without military support. With the establishment of colonial rule, the possibilities of credit collection improved, but some trading companies believed that they could easily eliminate the African intermediate trade by banning credit. Adolf Woermann did not believe this and was ultimately able to prevail with his objection to a general ban on credit. He was against it because he considered it an unnecessary restriction of the economic repertoire. It is also extremely interesting that Todzi shows in this context that the trading houses initially also argued against the establishment of a single currency in the colony because they believed that they could obtain a much more favorable rate by exchanging goods than by settling in a single currency. Another point. Brandy was at the center of the German trading houses' exports to Africa in exchange for colonial raw materials. This was advantageous for the German traders in that most of the spirits were produced in Hamburg distilleries. In contrast, cotton textiles, which were in great demand among African societies, had to be purchased mainly from British companies. However, the extensive export of alcohol by German trading companies came under heavy criticism, particularly from the missionary societies, which eventually reached the Reichstag. Adolf Woermann responded to this criticism with a notorious counter-speech in the Reichstag. There he argued that the ban would hit the German export hardly. However, he then tried to link the alleged European civilizing mission in Africa with the alcohol consumption. He said, and I quote, "I think that we are where one wants to create civilization, a sharp stimulant is needed here and there, and that sharp stimulants do little harm to civilization," quote end. This formulation was repeatedly taken up by Woermann's critics in the following years and held against him. Nevertheless, Woermann succeeded in preventing the Reich government from passing an alcohol export ban. In the early phase of colonialism, the trading houses focused on eliminating the African intermediate trade, especially after the prices for colonial product collapsed on the world markets in 1884, and the Woermann Group also suffered major losses. The German trading houses wanted to buy the product themselves more cheaply in the interior of the country in order to increase their profit margins. Everywhere, the middlemen resisted these attempts, often with violence. In Cameroon, the first major colonial wars resulted from attempts to eliminate African middlemen. This demonstrates the hypocrisy of some of the merchants' free trade rhetoric. Action was taken against the African middlemen with the argument that they had a monopoly over certain territories. However, if a monopoly concession for the area was given to the German company mergers after the military suppression, this was often not considered problematic by the companies involved. Overall, Todzi uses the Woermann case to show that there was no fundamental contradiction between free trade policy and colonialism, at least in the minds of some of the actors involved, and that attempts were made to reconcile the two. A very important section of the book is the discussion of forced labor in the colony of Cameroon. It becomes clear that Africans had no interest in working for German owners on the newly established larger plantations. They preferred to work on smaller plantations owned by Africans. This was also due to the racism of the German foremen and the regular use of violence. As the German plantation owners rarely resorted to the incentive of significantly higher wages, they usually demanded that the colonial state provide forced laborers. However, this was ideologically problematic because the colonization of Africa was justified by the fight against slavery. Furthermore, the colonial state only had limited power to comprehensively enforce forced labor. While the Woermann Group was initially in favor of forced labor, its position became increasingly skeptical. This was due to the fact that forced labor strengthened the resistance of the locals and made Woermann's trade more difficult. In addition, at least some of the colonized had an exit option against forced labor by fleeing to the hinterland or neighboring colonies. It should also be emphasized that Todzi makes every effort to include the perspective of African actors in the book as comprehensively as possible. The problem remains that the sources for this are very sparse. However, Todzi is at least able to show very well that African middlemen, African employees of the Woermann Company, and African women naturally had their own agency, and that even in the colonial situations, there were certainly opportunities for them to assert it. There are still many findings from this important study that are worth emphasizing here, such as the profits made by the Woermann shipping line during the genocide of the Herero and Nama, or the importance of the appendix with comprehensive data of the Woermann Company for further research. However, I will only briefly summarize here in order to get back to the suggestions for the discussion. Kim Todzi's book is a pioneering study that for the first time provides a comprehensive history of a trading company that was central to German colonialism. In doing so, the author succeeds in focusing on the close links between colonialism and capitalism, and in linking economic and social, cultural, historical issues and bringing them into discussion. I find the interpretation that Todzi develops of the material convincing throughout, so I don't want to present any alternative interpretations here, but I would like to briefly criticize the methodological suspension in the introduction, and then ask a few fundamental questions to which I would like to have heard more answers. One fact that is probably difficult to combat is that in many introductions, some keywords are strongly emphasized, but then only play a subordinate role in the analysis or ultimately remain meaningless. Platitudes and the associated terms are not used in the work. For a while, for example, the reference was often made to Luhmann's reduction of complexity. Yes, of course, we reduce complexity in every act of communication, but what use is the reference for historical studies? In most cases, it remains a buzzword. The situation is similar with Todzi's use of the term network. Of course, people always act in social networks, but what does that mean? Social science network research is strongly characterized by quantitative research. From the introduction, one might assume that Todzi is conducting a comprehensive network analyzing and deriving important results from it. Ultimately, however, Todzi only shows on 2 pages how business management is passed down through generations in a family. This does not provide major insights for the rest of the study, so why the prominent placement of the concept of networks in the introduction? I also find the reference to Alf Lütge's concept of Eigensinn and the claim to present a microhistory of globalization unconvincing. Despite the prominent mention in the introduction, the term Eigensinn hardly appears in the work and Lütge's concept is not used conceptually. Ultimately, Todzi largely lacks the sources for an everyday or microhistory, which means that the study remains largely an economic and political history, even if the work is informed by cultural and everyday history. In this respect, I would only argue here for a somewhat clearer designation of what the work can achieve. Now, my questions. The study already has 500 pages, so it's a bit presumptuous to point out questions here that I would still like to have answered. But after the completion of a book, there are often 1 or 2 essays to be written, so I dare to give the author a few more questions along the way. As I just mentioned, in my view, the study is primarily an economic and political history. However, as the focus is on a company, the Woermann Group could be approached even more closely with questions relating to company history. Such questions would be, for example, how long-term did the company management plan? Was there a strategic long-term concept or mainly short-term adaptation to changing conditions? How did the structure of a trading company differ from that of an industrial company? And what was the principal-agent relationship in the Woermann Group? Did the local people have a knowledge advantage, and how did the company management deal with that? So this was my first area of questions. The second I would also have liked to have heard a little bit more about the relationship between the trading company and the economic policy of the colonial administration. Todzi does say something at the beginning about the debate on the introduction of the currency, but then concentrate mainly on the question of concessions and forced labor when it comes to the colonial state. I would have liked to know more about how Woermann reacted to the customs, tax, and currency policy of the colonial state, and what role this played for the company and their profits. The third and last area of questions is more answers to the history of capitalism in the story. I would have been interested in the following questions. How can the role of merchant capital in the area of industrial capitalism be conceptualized analytically? How does the connection between trading and logistic groups develop under the conditions of colonialism? What role does colonial resource extraction play in the development opportunities of capitalism? And finally, and very generally, does the recently often discussed concept of racial capitalism make sense for colonial history? And is there anything to be said in favor of the thesis that capitalism is inherently racist? So thank you for your patience, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. a lot too for this comment. The combination of appraisal and question, I guess that also proves this general notion that good books do not answer only a lot of questions, but also pose new ones. And I think that's so both is actually an appraisal. And I think we can just, Kim, if you would agree, give you first the chance to pick up on the thoughts on the readings of your book. Maybe you have been completely misread, which I don't know, but you could say so too. And also come back to the questions that Marc have posed, but maybe also some of the issues where Cassandra emphasized that they are particularly of interest to her. And then we are free to open the discussion on the podium, but as well, of course, also to everyone in the room.
Yeah, thank you both so much. To listen to your readings of that book was a great pleasure, and I could not have imagined better commentators for today. So yeah, I'm really thinking about what you two just commented on the book, and I just something that came to my mind. And Cassandra, you were absolutely right in pointing out that I built the section on the relationships of African women and Woermann's merchants on the ground, on the very informative, inspiring work by Karina Ray and Jeremy Rich. It was a very illuminating moment for me to look at the history of the company, not only from the from trying to see what the economic transactions were, but to kind of in which social context they were enacted. And I think these works inspired looking at the sources and trying to find sources that kind of shed light to this dimension, which is rarely mentioned in any kind of official publication of the company whatsoever, or haven't been informed. And as you know, I took your work on the on labor recruitment and the role of Hetman very seriously, and it informed how I viewed and try to grasp the relationships. And I think that is an important part of the book. So thank you for highlighting that as well, because I think this whole social history context, or the social history of the company, is an important factor of the book I try to achieve, at least. That leads me to the questions that Marc just posed, and I think it is absolutely right to especially pose the questions concerning, is it even a company or business history as such? Because it is lacking, as you said, it is lacking some internal analysis of management, for example, decisions like what you just mentioned, how long term did they plan, and so on. And that is basically, and I would have loved to have a closer look at that. I just fear that is just lacking of sources, because the company archives got destroyed in World War II, and by bombs hitting the headquarters 2 times, and a fire that set most of the historical records on fire. And there are just no sources that can inform such a question. So I think it's important to raise it, but I think this company is not, or it will not be able to look at these questions with that company. There are other companies like Oswald or other merchant and trading houses that would be interesting to analyze in that sense, but I think that is not working in this case. Even though I would have been interested, just a lack of sources in that part. I mean, there are a lot of questions. I think I need to think about a little bit more, especially the one about racial capitalism. I haven't made up my mind about that, so maybe it's for future writing to answer that. But I think another thing that struck me was that you mentioned how, or the question was in a way how different is a trading company from an industrial company, and I think that is very important. And the structure of the company itself determines in a way, for example, labor relations and capital and many decisions that can or cannot be made by the management, by the direction, but also by local managers. I think what I found is that for a long time, being a trading company was a very flexible kind of entity for C. Woermann, because trading money is not fixated, or I don't know how to say it, but it's not, you don't have to invest for a very long time that money. You can pull out the money very fast, and you can choose regions where you invest. And I think the closest the company or the Woermann Group comes to being a kind of industrial company, not being an industrial company as such, but the closer it comes is when it founds the shipping line, Woermann Linie, where capital is invested for years to come, where you need much more capital than the family can provide, and where you have to recruit a lot of people to make the machines themselves work. So I think the trading company is very far, or it's not so close related to an industrial business, even though Eduard Woermann, the company director from 1910 till 1920, says basically a trading company in Africa is the same as an industrial company in Europe, because you have to bring all your staff. It is a lot of staff you have to have there. But I think he's wrong in that sense. I think a trading company is very different from an industrial company, but I think with becoming a more or less logistics company, and especially a steamship company, it became much more closer to that. So yeah, I think there are many more questions. I cannot answer them all. I think I have to get back to the recording to see them all. But yeah, thank you so much, both of you, Cassandra and Marc. It was it's so interesting to see how you read the book. So yeah, thank you.
which shows that it is really of mutual gain. You know, you get inspiration, we get inspiration. That is, that's a wonderful constellation. We still have, since we started a little later, we still have a couple of minutes. If those in the audience would like to join in, though I've often made the experience that book presentations have shorter discussions than other presentations, simply because one gets interested in reading the book and first wants to read the book and then is prepared to answer the question. So there's always a little bit of tension. Maybe from the depths of the subject, which we got into now, just two questions from my side that more concern the writing of the book in itself, because I guess we all remember the time when we've written our first book. It's a little bit like it's an adventure in its own, involving a lot of decisions. And I'd be curious to know what you would have been different, what you would have been doing different now with the experience that is the book, how the book is on the table. Are there things you would have organized in a different manner? Would you have written things differently? And my second question is, given the fact that it is a long book, typical German, over 500 pages, I guess nevertheless there were things that you would have liked to include, but then in the end, due to space, did not. And maybe you can tell us a little bit of what else is in your cupboard and may have entered the book and will come out in the future, maybe in form of articles.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if that's a shared experience by everybody, but now I know how I should have written that book. After completing and publishing it, I think now I know way better that a way to simply organize it. I think I would have shortened it considerably, and I think it's a typical German book in that sense. But I think for readability purposes, I think now I would shorten at least some 150 pages. But well, that is still something. I mean, I always tend to write longer than I should. So it's more of a wish for the future, or a goal for the future. What I would have liked to include is actually a very much longer perspective on the company, because for practical reasons I end in 1916 with a short afterlife of the company, but and I think there's a good argument, because the group as a group starts to dissolve, but I think the history after 1919 is very interesting, and I had a chance to look at that as well. And I just finished an article which will come out with contemporary European history in the coming month, in which I'll especially look into the a post-war period, and how see Woermann, now the trading company again, tries to re-establish themselves in West Africa, how they try, and then in other places, not Cameroon, but Liberia again, and the Gold Coast, nowadays Ghana, became the major spots, and they try to rebuy their plantations on Mount Cameroon, and I think that is a very interesting story. And after 1933, Kurt Woermann, the then head of the company, really engages, or he already have been a National Socialist before 1933, but he really tries to combine kind of the colonial and National Socialist ideology, and he became one of the proponents of Hamburg's merchant class to adapt to the new National Socialist regime. And what I find quite interesting, and there's a dissertation which came out just last year as well, by someone who looked very closely at the Hamburg and Bremen trading companies who were engaged in the Generalgouvernement. And C. Woermann was part of that, these Kreisgroßhändler. And I think this story, I now researched it after the dissertation, but that would have been a very, I think, important part of, or would have, or could have been an important part of the book as well, because it shows how one imperial project merges with the other, and how a company like C. Woermann adapts to the situation in this new political and economic context. So I think that is something I think I would have integrated from the beginning. Now it will be readable in the future, but I think that is something that would be quite interesting in the book as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. So we know now that we should read the book, those at least who have not read it, but can also look forward to editions, stories, that texts that continue the story. Are there remarks, questions in the room, or is now everybody eager either to digest what was said or to immediately find a way of ordering the book? That could be the alternative. I mean, we're having Tuesday, the day after Blue Monday, which is mid of January, always a difficult time in terms of cold, in terms of tiredness, and we're having it 6:12. So maybe it is also a good moment to stop after this broad presentation of the book, which I think really indeed deserved being awarded and being honored. And I'm also very glad that it was not just Kim, me, but also Cassandra and Marc introducing the book to the audience, and it was a wise decision to make a recording, because I think, Kim, you offered that it could be put online to be consulted at a later point of time, and I guess that even more so can make us finish for today and resume maybe in different constellations. I guess Cassandra and Tim, and also Marc and Kim, your paths will cross. I also hope that Kim and Anil's paths will cross in one way or the others, and that we stay attached to each other, and especially to global history in these times in which global perspectives become threatened from different forces in society and politics. So with this, I would say, if you don't disagree, then let's close for today. Thanks very much for everybody for joining, for staying, and hope to see you soon in the course of this year. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.